Hi everyone, it's Madison Lawson here. So I was just asked to do a bit of a video to, I guess, give you an introduction to who I am, what I do, and then just answer a couple basic questions. So I'm 23 years old at the moment. I study at Hartbury College in the UK. I just started, it's my first year, so sorry, I'm in my dorm room, I apologize. I'm studying an equestrian sports science degree, so I'll be here for 3 years, and then hopefully that degree will focus on therapy, so to bring horses back from serious injuries to their full working potential. So a bit about my background. I started riding at about 5, and I was convinced that I was going to be a show jumper, and that continued on for quite a while until I met an eventer in the North Bay area. So she became my coach, and then I suddenly wanted to be an eventer because it was something exciting and crazy. So I stuck with that for quite a while, and at 13, I ended up having a serious riding accident. So I was out with friends hacking. I was on a friend's horse at the time. You know, we were being safe. We had an adult with us. We were a large group. We had our helmets on and our cross-country vests on. And we were just hacking, actually. So essentially, we were just walking around the field chatting and, I guess, being girls. But the horse suddenly stopped, and then he reared and fell on top of me. So then I essentially was folded like a pancake. I knew I had broken my back. I heard, a crunch, and I knew things were wrong. I stayed conscious through the whole thing, unfortunately. But yeah, I knew something was seriously wrong. So they brought me to the hospital and then airlifted me to Sick Kids Hospital in Toronto. And there I had a 13-hour surgery where they essentially put me back together. They put rods in my spine to stabilize everything, but they told me that I would probably never walk again, let alone ride. And initially I thought, that maybe that would be true, but then I'll add on later on about how my thought process went from that to something entirely different. But anyways, I did recover from the accident. Obviously, I am riding and walking, and I started back into dressage when I started riding again. I didn't want to jump, it scared me too much, so I just stuck with the dressage, and I ended up meeting a dressage coach from Toronto, and she started working with me, and I started to really enjoy it. And then she suggested that I look into para-dressage, and I wasn't very educated at the time and didn't know what para-dressage was. So I ended up looking into it. With her help, I got my fabulous horse, McGuire, who was the greatest teacher I could ask for. And within a year of owning him, I had started doing very, very well. And then I did my first international show. And about, 7-8 months after that show, we were going to the World Equestrian Games as a para-dressage combination for Team Canada. So I went, and that was an amazing experience. I ended up finishing, I believe it was 11th in the freestyle. So I'd say that's pretty good as a 16-year-old. I definitely exceeded expectations, so that was really great, super experience. So after that, yeah, I really stuck with the para-dressage for a little bit longer, but then I decided to dabble in the able-bodied world into just able-bodied dressage. I thought that I could do it, no problem, because I didn't really see myself as having a disability. It was never something that I thought was working against me. So I decided to give it a try. So I did FEI Juniors, and I did very poorly my first show, but then I started getting better, and I made the Ontario team for the Junior Young Rider, North American Junior Young Rider Championship, sorry. So I made the junior team for Ontario, which was great, and I did very well. I finished 9th, I think, out of 42 people, so that was, again, a bit of a shock. I exceeded all expectation, even my own. So I decided to do it again. I did it the next year, but as a young rider because I'd aged out. We didn't do so well that year. It was more challenging. The combinations were so competitive. But I still think we finished mid-pack, so that was pretty good. McGuire was getting older at the time, so I was thinking about retiring him, which I did. I did qualify for the Young Rider team the following year, but I declined that position because I was selling him, and I didn't want him injured or to put him through the stress of that. So I did sell him, found him a fabulous owner, and then I bought a new horse, Lawrence. So Lawrence was very different from McGuire. He was a bit of a dragon, spooky, hot, biggest baby. He was the total opposite of what McGuire was. So that was a huge challenge. and I had some challenging years with him, but I did very well when I started showing with him. I got personal bests. Probably every show I had beaten my own personal best, and it got to the point I got 78% in a freestyle. Um, and it really was a fantastic ride, the ride of my life. So that was amazing. And then I started back into para dressage with him after being in the able body world for a while. And I heard that para dressage was going to be part of the North American Junior Young Rider Championships for the first time. So I decided that I had to be on that team, and we made the team. So we went for the inaugural year, and I won double gold with Lawrence. So that was amazing, fantastic experience. And I continued on with him. I set goals with him, but unfortunately, I lost him this spring to severe colic. Excuse me. So I had to put him down. So that was hard. I'd say that was probably a lot harder than going through my accident. And then things kind of started falling apart a little bit. The farm I was training and working at and living at sold. So I no longer had my horse, a job, or a place to stay or train. So that's why I decided to look into schooling. And I found an amazing college in the UK that really caters to equestrians. So I'm really enjoying it so far. But so let's just touch on a couple points that I have here. So essentially one of the first questions that I want to speak on is, what was the process after your accident that enabled you back to riding? I don't think there was really a process. I think it just, at first you feel a bit sorry for yourself. Why me? Why did this happen? How can I bounce back from it? So I was in kind of a dark place. But then, as a 13-year-old, you're a bit bratty about certain things, and someone tells you, oh, you can't do that. Well, the first reaction was, yes, I can, and you can watch me do it. And I think that's kind of what kickstarted it. So I thought, they were telling me I could never walk, but I could probably ride. So I did end up walking again at a rehab center that I worked very hard. And one day I just decided I'm going to get on a horse today, and I did. It was a lot earlier than the surgeon had suggested, so I wouldn't try that, but I did, being young and immature. And I just kept doing it. I just kept getting on a horse every single day, and I wouldn't do anything crazy, just walking around. And that actually helped my rehabilitation process go a lot quicker. So in sense of mobility, working on my range of motion, balance was massive, and strength as well. So it wasn't really, I guess, a process. I just made it happen. I made the decision that this is how it's going to be, and then it really did help me kind of get back on my feet, so to speak. So I think it was a good decision, maybe a little premature, but all in all, it ended up very well. So do I wear a helmet every time I ride? Yes, I do. I have my helmet right here. I have several helmets, so I have a bit of an obsession with helmets. I guess it's a good thing. But this is my schooling one, which I wear every day. And every time I'm on a horse, I do wear a helmet. I think it's very, very important. You hear of these accidents, and professional riders, they fall off too, and they can get hurt. As human beings, we're not invincible. And I think especially when you're younger, you might think that you are invincible and that you can bounce back from certain things or certain falls, but you can't take that risk. It's not worth it. I mean, I had my accident and I had a helmet on. I'm very lucky because I'm not entirely sure how, the pommel or the cantle of the saddle didn't hit me in the head or the face. I'm thankful it didn't. But if it had, I think my helmet would have definitely saved me from having a brain injury, as well as a spinal cord injury. So yes, I do wear a helmet. Now, there was one time that I did not wear a helmet. It was in a competition. It was my first pre-St. George competition where I could wear the hat and tails, so my top hat. And I was fairly young at the time. I think I might have been 18, 19 years old, and I wanted to wear the top hat. I thought it was elegant, and that's just something that I wanted to do. So I did do it. And you know what? It didn't look any better in photos. It didn't make me perform better. It didn't add to it, and it didn't take away from my ride. So really, it didn't make a difference. And was it worth the risk? Most likely not. I know my mother didn't want me to do it. And I felt a bit ashamed that I decided to do that just because of the aesthetic of it, that I decided that the aesthetics was more important than maybe safety. So that was the only time I did not wear a helmet when I rode. And I do regret it a little bit, just because it was a gamble. Thankfully, nothing happened, but it's still a gamble, and you never know what's going to happen. So yes, I do. I wear my helmet all the time. And then what other safety precautions do I take when I work around horses? So the funny thing is actually here in England, they have quite a strict protocol at the school. So whenever you are working with a horse, in the stall with a horse, brushing, tacking up, walking, anytime you are around a horse, you have to wear your helmet at all times. It's non-negotiable. So it's pretty extreme here, or some would say it's extreme, but I can understand from a liability standpoint. And from a safety standpoint, they want their students to be safe and to thrive. They don't want accidents happening or having students or staff had bad experiences with the horses, especially when it's such a massive part of this school. So I do wear my helmet at any time that I'm around a horse or in the yard, which is the stable, what we call the stable. So I guess that's a new precaution that I've been taking, is wearing my helmet when I handle horses at all times. Now with the FEI, they had just brought in for younger riders, when you jog your horse at an FEI competition, that you must wear a helmet if you're underage. And I think that's a super precaution that they've taken, because a lot of accidents can happen at these FEI jogs or trot ups. So I think that's a huge thing. So when I have jogged or even presented my horse, I do wear my helmet when doing that, because they can get a bit frisky and hot, and accidents can happen. And I have seen very bad accidents happen at what would seem like a very basic controlled environment. Aside from helmets, you obviously wear the proper footwear around a horse. You have to be very aware when you're handling a horse. I think once you take something for granted or let your guard down, that's when accidents can happen. My horse Lawrence was, again, like I said, very different. McGuire was calm and he was the teacher. Lawrence was the child. He would bite, he would kick, he would bolt, he would rear, he would buck, whatever trick, he would pull it. He was a hot horse, and he was, some would say, almost dangerous, but he seemed to perform well. So I did, I guess, put up with that, but I had to be extremely careful with him. I had to have a chain with him at all times in case something would happen. I would never put myself in front of him where he could bite me, and when he has gotten me. He's put holes in my sweaters. He's kicked me when putting ice boots on, when I thought it was just, a regular thing. You're rushing, you're trying to get things done. You slap the ice boot on or the polo on, and it's just too quick, and you let your guard down, and that's when they get you. So I think just being very, very aware of what you're doing, where your body is, where you're putting yourself around that horse, even if it's a quiet horse. Something could happen. A firework could go off, something could crash in the stable, and it spooks that otherwise quiet horse, and you just find yourself in the wrong place at the wrong time. So I think just being very, very aware, and you have to respect their power. They're extremely powerful animals, and if they want to hurt you, they can, and they will. You're very little compared to them. It's, if you were to have a tug of war with a horse, we would lose pretty much every time. So I think that's a huge thing. So let's just touch on this last question. What advice do you have for any rider that suffers a fall? Well, I think with the ruling now, that especially I think in the event world, in the show jumping, if you do fall, you cannot get back on and carry on. I think that's smart. I had a best friend who was schooling cross country, and she had what looked like a very normal fall. But it wasn't, and by the time her coach and her father reached her, she was having a seizure, like in the movies, frothing at the mouth, her eyes would roll back, and she'd suffered a severe concussion. Now, if she would have gotten up and felt fine and gotten back on the horse, and that would have happened on the horse, then it could have been a lot more serious, and she would have definitely put her life at risk. So I do think that rule is huge. And if we do look at other sports, especially contact sports like football and hockey, if you're suspected of having a concussion, you can no longer play. And I think that's a good thing. It's not just saving the athlete in that moment, but it's saving their longevity or their quality of life down the road. We see a lot of boxers or MMA fighters that have severe trauma to the head several times. Their quality of life is not the greatest. They suffer from certain diseases, or just their mental health isn't there anymore. There is a bit, I guess, more depression that could be present there. And then you get into some deeper, darker stuff, and that's all kind of trailing back at, 20 years earlier when you thought you were invincible and you could just carry on. But really, it's not smart anymore. I think we have to be very careful in preserving ourselves and being smart about it. If you do fall, you need to just go back to the barn or go home, ask someone for help, go to the hospital, make sure, there's no harm in seeing if you're okay. It's better safe than sorry. And obviously, when you have a fall, it's recommended that you do change your helmet because you never know that the structure could be compromised. And I think that's very smart because you wouldn't want to risk that either. Some people don't see it as a sport because you just sit there. But when you think of it, it can be considered almost a contact sport because we do fall off. We do hit things. Even when your horse headbutts you in the head or the nose, that's the most painful thing in the world. So it'd be better off to have a helmet if your horse headbutts you. But I think it's very smart and people need to respect that and not try and be heroes about it because it's not worth the gamble. It's not worth your life. It's not worth the quality of your life down the road. So I think we just have to be smart about it. And I think other sports are kind of catching on into that, I guess, the concussion movement. And I think we need to as well because we run a high risk of concussion and injuries. It is a very dangerous sport, unfortunately. But I think if we practice safety and we go along with protocols and follow the rules, I think we can make it a very safe environment and a very safe sport.